One of the major things that intrigues us all about prehistory so much is the fauna that lived throughout times long past. This can be applied to all prehistoric life, not just the life in the Late Cenozoic, but it is fascinating to think of the species that our ancestors encountered that we cannot. As our earliest Homo erectus ancestors left Africa, they would have stepped into a world bursting with giant herbivores, bizarre marsupials, and terrifying carnivores, many of which are no longer in existence today. Through a combination of overhunting, climate change, or competition between species, there are a vast number of fascinating extinct animals that would have lived alongside and preyed upon our ancestors. Today, we will be exploring these species in detail. This is a journey that will take us across the Late Cenozoic era, where we will encounter animals that lived alongside not only early Homo sapiens, but our Australopithecine ancestors too, the early African apes that first walked upright across the grasslands. We will meet colossal birds, giant reptiles, and some of the strangest, most unfamiliar mammals ever to evolve as we go. Join us as we travel back in time to meet the species our ancestors saw that we modern humans unfortunately never got the chance to meet. Across human evolution, our ancestors lived alongside some of the largest mammalian predators the world has ever seen, the bears. When Australopithecines first evolved, bears even shared the African continent with them. Agriotherium africanum was one of them, a 2.5-meter long, 600-kilogram early bear that, despite its immense size, was likely not a hunter. Lack of power in the forelimbs and shorter claws point towards the idea that this was a bear that spent much of its time foraging for plant matter, while stealing and scavenging kills from active hunters when the opportunity arose. The bear's size would have helped it defend its scavenged food, and would have certainly struck fear into potential attackers. Agriotherium would go extinct around 2.5 million years ago, meaning that later hominids would never encounter it. As humans migrated out of Africa and into Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas, they would encounter a few species of bear that were much more of a threat. In the cold reaches of northern Europe, Ursus spelaeus, the cave bear, thrived in the evergreen forests and open tundra of the Mammoth steppe, residing within the caves that humans would seek out for shelter and warmth. Whilst largely herbivorous, this is a species that our ancestors would have come into direct conflict with when seeking a place to rest, and encounters such as these would no doubt have been not only terrifying, but dangerous. These bears were close in size to the very largest of their modern counterparts, with males weighing up to 600 kilograms and boasting the long claws and powerful muscles of modern-day brown bears, their closest modern relative. Crossing the land bridge over the Bering Strait and into the Americas, the first humans to arrive in Alaska and Canada would have met Arctodus simus, one of several species of short-faced bear. Adults could stand almost 3.5 meters when reared up on their hind legs, dwarfing early humans who encroached onto their territory. Adult Arctodus are thought to have attained weights of 950 kilograms, making them one of the largest terrestrial mammalian predators ever to walk the earth. Thriving in open woodlands, this bear was thought to have been a capable hunter, supplementing its diet of fruit and plants with meat. Moreover, Arctodus was built for endurance running, meaning that it could keep a strong pace whilst covering a great deal of ground. There were no doubt deadly encounters between this giant bear and our early ancestors who first made it into the Americas. In the Pleistocene, big cats were even more widespread than they are today, and famously came in the saber and scimitar-toothed varieties too. Humans have had to be wary of these huge predatory felines for their entire evolutionary existence, and they would have been a very, very real threat to our early ancestors. Megantereon and Dinofelis were perhaps some of humanity's first great fears. These early saber-toothed cats of the subfamily Machaerodontinae were thought to have been specially evolved primate hunters, suited perfectly for hunting on the fringes of woodland and grassland, where the very first upright apes resided. Megantereon was likely better suited to pursuing primates than Dinofelis, who was also a keen hunter of grazing grassland animals, but both would have posed a significant threat to Australopithecines and early members of the genus Homo out in ancient Africa. The saber teeth of these animals would have been used to deliver a powerful bite to the throat of a downed prey item, killing it quickly and efficiently, whilst minimizing any potential damage done to the teeth. One of the most widespread saber-toothed cats that lived alongside humans was Homo who lived from roughly 4 million to 12,000 years ago. Roughly the size of a modern-day African lion, Homo was at home not only in Africa, but across Europe, Asia, North America, and South America in several different species. Where many big cats live as ambush predators, lurking in the tall grass until they can reliably strike, Homo was thought to be more of a pursuit predator. Its longer legs allowed it to chase down fast-moving prey, but its powerful muscles meant that it could bring down animals as large as early elephant ancestors. Smilodon is by far the most well-known saber-toothed cat, and would have been quite an animal for the very first Americans to keep a watchful eye out for. This quintessential prehistoric predator was known for its massive, curved, knife-like canines, which, accompanied with its robust body structure, would have allowed it to prey upon animals much larger than itself. Bison and camels would have been its preferred prey, but given the right opportunity, early humans could have been on the menu too. Smilodon was capable of living in a wide range of habitats, from the open grasslands of South America to the woodlands and scrublands of North America. It went extinct just 10,000 years ago. Not all of the now extinct big cats were of the saber-toothed variety. Panthera spelaea, or the Eurasian cave lion, was one of the last species to inhabit the cold northern regions of Europe, Asia, and parts of North America during the last ice age, and is depicted in early artworks on the walls of caves created by some of the very first Homo sapiens in these regions. Like the cave bear, this huge lion would have been a formidable predator to watch out for when early humans were seeking refuge from the elements in caves, where they may or may not have lived in prides. Humans and cave lions almost certainly hunted one another, with humans collecting the lion's warm pelts for protection against the weather, and the lions stalking defenseless bands of roving humans through the snowy wilderness for an opportunistic meal. All over the ancient Pleistocene world, the abundance of food, base, and suitable climate conditions allowed herbivores to grow very large. As the herbivores grew larger, so did the carnivores, and as such, the herbivores evolved ways to reliably defend themselves from these threats. Armor and weaponry became a necessity for an animal to survive in a world populated by giants, and as such, our ancestors encountered many species of extinct herbivorous mammal that were defended by thick shells, huge horns, vast antlers, or slashing claws. Perhaps the most famous of these are the ancient relatives of the rhinoceros, Coelodonta and Elasmotherium. Coelodonta is the scientific genus of the animal more commonly known as the woolly rhinoceros, a 3.5-meter long, 2-ton behemoth with a thick coat of fur and a meter-long horn. Specimens of woolly rhinoceros that have been dragged out of the Siberian permafrost indicate that in life these animals were a reddish-brown color, with a layer of guard hair to protect the base coat from the elements. It lived across the lowlands in the huge mammoth steppe of Eurasia, which would have seasonally been covered in snow. While early humans hunted the rhino, it would not have been an easy task. A thick hide and a colossal horn would have required a great deal of planning and preparation to get around, if human hunters were to keep their lives. Elasmotherium, another well-known species of rhinoceros relative that lived across Siberia throughout the last ice age, was also encountered by early humans. Once dubbed the Siberian unicorn after the belief that these animals possessed immense conical horns on their heads, it is now thought that they instead had much shorter, blunter structures on their skulls, rendering the classic depiction of them obsolete. While it is commonly depicted as such, Elasmotherium may not have even had a woolly coat, and has even been suggested to have been semi-aquatic in the past. Elasmotherium is not as closely known as Coelodonta, but is thought to have been much larger, at least 5 meters from nose to tail, weighing in at around 5 tons. Crossing the ocean to the Americas, our earliest ancestors would have come face to face with giant xenarthrans, sloths and armadillos much, much larger than any of their extant relatives. Giant ground sloths are now a well-known staple of Pleistocene megafauna, and our ancestors would have come face to face with multiple species. In North America, ancient hunter-gatherers would have met Eremotherium, one of the very largest of the ground sloths, roughly the size of an African elephant. It lived across the subtropical plains in what are now the southern states, where it could easily be identified with its huge forelimbs, giant claws, and ability to stand on 2 legs. It is often seen as a northern counterpart to the much more famous but slightly smaller Megatherium, which lived across the tropical grasslands of South America, although the ranges of both sloths crossed over one another. While both these genera were entirely herbivorous, they are thought to have been temperamental and highly aggressive if cornered or attacked. Given their size and strength, they had few natural predators in their environments outside of early humans, whose cut and scratch marks have been found on their giant bones. Glyptodonts, huge relatives of modern armadillos, are known to have coexisted with humans across the continent of South America when they first arrived. The largest and most well-known of the glyptodonts are Glyptodon and Didicurus, the latter of which sported an immense, spiked, mace-like structure at the end of its long tail. While the South American grasslands were littered with predators, the glyptodonts had an edge in the form of armor that almost entirely encapsulated their bodies. If a saber-tooth decided to strike, all the glyptodont needed to do was hunker down, protecting its soft belly until the predator grew bored and looked for an easier meal. Humans, on the other hand, were likely much more persistent and are thought to have hunted glyptodonts up until around 11,000 years ago. Across the mammoth steppe and the tundra of North America, one group of animals were capable of evolving to immense sizes, with impressive ornamentation to boot: deer. Remnants of the extreme sizes deer ended up reaching in the Pleistocene can be seen today in the moose, one of the largest and most dangerous herbivores in the world. As large as the moose is, its close relative Cervalces latifrons, or the broad-fronted moose, was capable of growing much larger. Thought to have been the most massive species of deer ever to live, as well as being the direct ancestor of the modern moose, this species boasted giant antlers with long beams, which ended in a splayed, hand-like structure at the tip of each. These antlers were actually wider than the moose was long, reaching a span of 2.5 meters in length, in contrast to the animal's 2-meter body length. Another well-known species is Megaloceros, the Irish elk, that inhabited much of Eurasia across the Pleistocene. While much lighter than Cervalces, Megaloceros's antlers are thought to have reached an immense 3.5 meters across. At home in open woodlands, tundra, and plains in the windswept north, these giant deer would have been quite the prize for ancient hunter-gatherers looking to feed their settlement. It wasn't just mammals that were capable of growing to truly impressive sizes. Across the world, but usually in isolated environments free from mammalian predators, giant birds were able to evolve. Most were flightless, but some were still capable of taking to the skies and possibly posed a threat to the children of our ancestors. While the infamous Phorus racids or terror birds of the Americas never came into contact with humans, seafaring folk who began traveling from island to island in the Pacific were lucky enough to come face to face with the Dinornithiformes, the moas. The largest of the moas was Dinornis robustus, the 3.5 meter tall South Island giant moa, who, as the name might suggest, lived on New Zealand's South Island up until the arrival of the Maori, who are thought to have hunted it and all of its close relatives to extinction. Whereas many are familiar with the giant moas, you might be surprised to learn that there were in fact 9 species of moa, all of which are now extinct. These included the crested moa, the heavy-footed moa, the upland moa, and the smallest of the group, the bush moa, who grew to roughly the size of a wild turkey. These huge birds were hunted for their meat, which Pacific Islanders thrived off while exploring the southern seas. It wasn't just extinct terrestrial birds that the Maori were able to meet, however. Hyaretus mori, or the Haast's eagle, a giant bird of prey with a 3-meter wingspan. The eagle was a skilled hunter of moas and developed its giant size as an evolutionary response to the same thing happening in its prey. Ancient stories describe Haast's eagle swooping down from the hills to carry off Maori children for prey, and the eagle has been directly linked to the legend of Puakai, a terrifying predatory bird in Maori mythology. The eagle became extinct when the Maori introduced the invasive Polynesian rat to New Zealand, who wreaked havoc on their eggs. Maori construction and industry in the region also led to deforestation and wildfires, which helped to decimate the remaining population by the mid-1400s. Early travelers to Madagascar encountered a bird larger than even the moas, the Apiornithiformes, or elephant birds. 3 species lived alongside the first Madagascans: Mullornis modestus, Apiornis hildebranti, and the largest bird ever to live, Apiornis maximus. With long necks, large bodies, and paler-like legs, you would be forgiven for recognizing these animals as highly derived sauropods, living dinosaurs from a place lost in time. Their closest relatives, however, are the kiwis, the small, flightless mammalian-like birds that feed on invertebrates in the woodlands of New Zealand. Apiornis maximus may have weighed up to 1,000 kilograms and grew to more than 3 meters in height, making it larger and heavier than the moas. Unfortunately, the elephant bird became extinct around 1000 CE as a result of overhunting by humans for their meat and feathers. When humans were able to reach the vast island of Australia around 48,000 years ago, nothing could have prepared them for the animals they would encounter. Even today, Australia almost exists in a world of its own, a corner of the world where animals have become isolated by water and evolution has run riot. Predominantly occupied by marsupials, Australia was no stranger to the megafaunal takeover experienced by the rest of the world. One of the first giant marsupials to have been encountered by ancient Australian settlers would have been Procoptodon goliath, the giant short-faced kangaroo. Walking with a more upright stance than modern kangaroos and having evolved legs that permitted it to walk instead of hop, this would have been quite the sight for our ancestors. Witnessing this bipedal, almost 3-meter-tall creature with forward-facing eyes and an uncanny walking pattern would have been nothing short of terrifying. Unless provoked, they would not have been a major threat, however. These giants fed on trees and shrubs out of the reach of many of the ground-dwelling marsupials. One of the most famous extinct marsupials of Australia's past is the mighty Diprotodon. Resembling to an extent a furry hippopotamus, measuring 4 meters from nose to tail and wandering through the forests and plains of ancient Australia on legs like an elephant's, you would be forgiven for mistaking this animal as a distant relative of the wombats. Widespread across Australia until our ancestors hunted it to extinction only a few thousand years ago. Diprotodon was a robust, powerful herbivore that fed on shrubs and grasses. Extensive research has gone into a series of well-preserved Diprotodon fossils over the years, and scientists have been able to determine a series of fascinating truths about it. It was migratory, traveling across Australia with the seasons, and was thought to have done this in large herds or family groups. This would have provided safety in numbers for young and old Diprotodon who could defend themselves against predators more reliably. Unfortunately, this could not withstand the encroaching threat of ancient humans, and eventually succumbed to their growing numbers and technologies. Perhaps the most unfamiliar and therefore eerie predator of the Pleistocene was Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion of Australia. While its closest living relative is the koala, who are more than capable of defending themselves from attack, Thylacoleo was in another league entirely. It was the largest and most powerful mammalian predator of ancient Australia, and would have been capable of tackling a plethora of prey items, including the giant Diprotodon as well as our early ancestors. Its teeth were unlike those seen in any modern mammalian carnivore, sheer and wedge-like, used for cleaving meat from the bone. Thylacoleo was an ambush predator, with forelimbs built for immense force rather than endurance and speed. The most commonly accepted theory on its preferred hunting style was that it leapt from the branches of overhanging trees when a suitable prey item wandered cluelessly below, slashing at the victim with sharp claws and their unique teeth. As such, they're thought to have primarily inhabited forests, but are believed to have climbed up to the faces of rocky outcrops to rear their young in sheltered caves, where they could reliably defend them. Around 40,000 years ago, the last Thylacoleos were wiped out, either by early humans, climatic changes, or a combination of both. As the most successful group of mammals in Australia were the marsupials, the Pleistocene saw a wide variety of ecological niches get hauled up from the evolutionary depths to create some of the strangest mammals that have ever lived. None were stranger than Palorchestes, the marsupial's ancestor to the placental tapir, with a body much like a ground sloth and the lifestyle of a giant panda. Looking at Palorchestes in the flesh, you would be hard-pressed to confidently place it within any living group of mammals. Its snout may have ended in a short trunk, which would have been prehensile to help it strip vegetation from plant stems and branches, and it possessed powerful curved claws on its forelimbs to help it pull vegetation into its mouth. Reconstructions of this animal range greatly in form. Some recreate the animal as a herbivorous bear, while others place it more on the sloth side. Regardless, it was without a doubt one of the most bizarre animals to be produced throughout the Pleistocene, and our ancestors were lucky enough to meet it. The famed Age of Reptiles tends to describe a time long before human beings appeared on the scene. But in some regions of the Pleistocene world, reptiles managed to hold on. In some places, reptiles even managed to preside over mammals in their ecosystems. This was rare, but across remote locations such as Australia and the islands of the Pacific Ocean, some of the strangest and largest reptiles ever to live were encountered by our ancestors. Australia, unsurprisingly, was a breeding ground for such animals, and one of the most powerful predators of the entire landmass was Quincana, a huge terrestrial galloping crocodile, one that ran after its prey on elongated legs. Up to 5 meters long and armed with a set of jaws capable of delivering an immensely powerful bite, Quincana only went extinct 10,000 years ago, meaning that for over 30,000 years our ancestors encountered it. Quincana would likely have still been an ambush predator, but one that may have lived away from water, running down its prey before tearing into it with massive jaws. Elsewhere in Australia lived the most well-known of the Pleistocene reptiles, Varanus priscus, otherwise known as Megalania. Upper size estimations place this huge monitor lizard at around 7 meters in length, whereas others claim it to be between 3 and 4 meters. It was a close relative of the extant Komodo dragon, a species which in Megalania's day also lived in Australia. Megalania would have been the largest terrestrial lizard ever to exist, preying upon the large marsupials mentioned in the last segment. It was likely the apex predator of Australia until its eventual demise upon the arrival of human hunters. If giant crocodiles and the largest terrestrial lizard ever weren't enough for ancient Australians to worry about, then consider 6-meter-long snakes. Wonambi was a huge constrictor, non-venomous, but one that would have been capable of inflicting a massive amount of force as it ambushed and squeezed prey items. It is likely that due to the size of Wonambi's head that it preyed upon rather small animals as large as young humans and kangaroos. They would have laid in wait by watering holes where they could sun themselves and wait for prey to come to the water's edge to drink. It is thought that eventually Wonambi became extinct due to human activity as they cleared the land it relied upon. Throughout the Pleistocene and into the Holocene, giant stem turtles existed in what are now known as the islands of Lord Howe, Vanuatu, Fiji, and New Caledonia. Some species were also present in Australia. Maiolania was much more well-armored than the turtles we know today, and was covered in defensive spikes along its head, tail, limbs, and the edges of its raised shell. It possessed huge horns on its skull, and in some species the tail was tipped with a bony, club-like structure. All of these structures would have been useful in defending itself from predators and rivals throughout the mating season. Studies on Maiolania are yet to reveal how the animal became widespread across the South Pacific, or how specifically it became extinct. It is thought that Maiolania may have been able to travel across the now sunken continent of Zealandia to reach the high ground of the islands, where it eventually became isolated and split into different species. Humans met Maiolania, and it is likely that they contributed to the eventual extinction of the species, but this is yet to be confidently confirmed. On their travels across the world during their migration out of Africa, humans would have encountered a great deal of other primates, some of which were as outlandish and bizarre as the other animals in today's video. Perhaps the strangest encounter would have been other species of humans themselves, such as the famous interactions between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis in the Mammoth steppe. Both of these species would have in turn interacted with the mysterious Denisovans of Siberia and Central Asia, an early human we know relatively little about. The last surviving Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis would have met with other humans as the species began to fade out too. It's strange from a modern perspective to imagine just one other species of human being alive today. But our ancestors lived in a world where we were very much a widespread family. In the bamboo forests of southern China, Homo erectus would have come across Gigantopithecus, the largest primate known to have existed, and an animal we have previously covered on this channel. This giant ape, related to modern-day orangutans, is only known from isolated jawbones and teeth, but scientists have been able to infer a great deal of information about it from just this. The ape was likely defensive and territorial like its modern relatives, but was not a predator. It is in fact thought to have been entirely herbivorous, feeding on bamboo shoots and leaves across densely wooded areas. Gigantopithecus has been estimated at measuring between 2.5 to 3.5 meters tall, which would make it over a meter taller than the largest species of ape today, the western gorilla. Depictions of this ape range from resembling a bipedal, Bigfoot-like animal to the much more accurate image of a knuckle-walking, gorilla-like creature with the overall appearance of an orangutan. There is much we don't know about Gigantopithecus, and as a full skeleton has never been recovered, we can only hope that eventually we are able to reliably construct this animal accurately. It would be impossible to make a video about the animals encountered by our earliest ancestors without mentioning those that are synonymous with the Pleistocene, the proboscideans. Mammoths and mastodons were the largest terrestrial animals of the Ice Age and have justly gone down as icons of prehistory. Mammoths traversed the wide expanses of the self-titled Mammoth Steppe in huge numbers, surviving on remote Siberian islands up until relatively recently. Mammoths were also present in North America in a number of species, but mastodons were absent from Eurasia. Both groups of proboscideans were large, powerful, and intelligent, close relatives of modern-day elephants. Mammoths were, for the most part, at home in open plains and snowy forests, whereas mastodons were known to inhabit warmer climes of grasslands and prairies. Our earliest ancestors would have come across various species from both groups as they traversed the ancient world, where they hunted, revered, and painted them. Perhaps no other animal is as closely linked to ancient humans as these huge, hairy behemoths. One of the most surprising evolutionary relationships in all of mammalian natural history is how closely related proboscideans are to hyraxes. Today, hyraxes are small, plump, rat-like animals that thrive in the scrubland and forests of sub-Saharan Africa. But throughout the Cenozoic, they were much more diverse. Long-legged forms, semi-aquatic forms, and giant forms all existed from the Eocene to the Pliocene. But one species surprisingly lived on and was quite at home in the southern reaches of the Mammoth Steppe. From northern China, Postschizotherium was the last surviving giant hyrax relative, a bulky animal with a woolly coat and long teeth that lived alongside early humans and the mammoths in the Nihuan Basin. Very little is known about it, and it is almost absent from paleoart and media. But this bizarre animal managed to pull through into the days of humans, and our ancestors would have likely lived alongside and hunted it. It was almost unrecognizable from the hyraxes of the modern day, looking more like a huge, woolly capybara than a small, distant relative of the elephant. That's part of the beauty of the Pleistocene. So many animals that are so close, yet so unfamiliar to modern humans, managed to find their way. It truly was one of the most fascinating periods in natural history. The Pleistocene is still a time that continues to baffle anthropologists, archaeologists, and paleontologists alike. It's frustrating that we came so close to being able to see these animals, but due to overhunting and climate change simply cannot. Therefore, that makes many species hard to study and learn about, and there is without a doubt entire species we don't even know of. Some Pleistocene animals, such as mammoths, have recently been the subject of the big de-extinction debate. Should we and can we ethically resurrect these animals to walk alongside us once again? To see these animals in the flesh would surely be nothing short of a wonder. But it's important to remember that the past is the past. We're now approaching a time when the past could very well become our future, if de-extinction is carried out. All we can do is wait and see what happens next.